Hey everyone! What would you do if the person you trusted the most not only betrayed you but also tried to take away everything you've built? Stick with me until the end, and I'll share every detail of this unbelievable story. Ready? Let's dive in. The sun was sinking behind the trees on a quiet September evening, casting a soft, golden light across the street. I should have been feeling excited. It was my birthday tomorrow, and Emily had been planning the celebration for weeks. She was always so particular about getting every little thing just right. But as I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The curtains were drawn, shutting out the last rays of the evening light. Emily never closed the curtains this early. She loved how the sunset lit up the living room with a warm glow. I sat there for a moment before stepping out of the car, a strange unease slowly creeping into my chest. Maybe it was just part of the party setup. Still, when I opened the front door, the house felt oddly quiet. I called out, "Hey Em, I'm home." But the only sound I heard was the faint clinking of dishes coming from the kitchen. I headed toward the living room but froze when I saw her. She was standing by the window, back to me, clutching her phone tightly to her ear. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, and I couldn't make out what she was saying. Then she turned around, eyes wide with surprise, shoving the phone into her pocket before I could even process what I had just seen. "Matt, you're home early," she said with a voice that was too cheerful, too forced. Her smile barely reached her eyes, and she avoided looking at me as she walked over to give me a quick, robotic kiss on the cheek. "Yeah, I wrapped up sooner than I thought," I said, trying to sound casual, though my gut told me something wasn't right. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she answered quickly, heading straight to the kitchen. "Just getting things ready for tomorrow, you know? A lot of last-minute stuff to do." Her words were rushed, and she still wouldn't meet my eyes. My gaze drifted to her pocket where the phone was now hidden, and my mind began racing. Who was she talking to? Why did she look so guilty? I tried to brush it off, at least on the outside. "All right. Just don't overwork yourself, you've been at it nonstop," I said, hoping to ease the tension. Emily nodded, giving me a tight smile. "It's fine, really. Everything's going to be perfect." But her voice sounded distant, like she wasn't really talking to me but just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. As I headed upstairs to change, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. For weeks now, Emily had been distant, always glued to her phone, staying out late, coming home with vague excuses. At first I thought maybe she was just stressed, maybe overwhelmed with planning the party. But now, I wasn't so sure. That nagging feeling stayed with me all evening. Later, we sat in the living room, the TV flickering softly in the background. I glanced at Emily sitting beside me on the couch, but it felt like she was miles away. She kept checking her phone, her fingers scrolling absently, her eyes never quite meeting mine. Every now and then, she'd type out a message, the light from the screen illuminating her face in the dim room. I could feel the distance between us growing, like a wall either of us wanted to acknowledge. "Busy night?" I asked, trying to keep things casual. She barely looked up. "Your phone," I said with a smile, hoping to lighten the mood. "You've been glued to it all evening." "Oh, just a few messages about tomorrow," she replied quickly, her eyes already back on the screen. "Nothing important." But it felt important. It felt like she was hiding something. My stomach churned with doubt, but I swallowed it down, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. She was probably just anxious about the party. But the way she acted, how she kept guarding that phone like it held her deepest secrets, had me on edge. When we got ready for bed, the tension between us was thick. I slipped under the covers, watching as Emily climbed in next to me, immediately turning her back. Her phone was still in her hand, the screen lighting up one last time before she finally placed it on the nightstand. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to ask. Was there someone else? Had I been missing something? I tried to tell myself she was just tired, maybe stressed from all the planning. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something had shifted between us. And for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure if I could trust her. The next morning, The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen. Normally, that scent would have made me smile, but today, it barely registered. The unease from the night before was still there, tightening in my chest with every passing thought. By the time I got downstairs, Emily was already at the stove, her back to me like any other morning. She looked completely normal. It was almost as if the tension from last night was all in my head, like nothing had changed between us. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to walk in, wrap my arms around her, and pretend everything was okay. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. "Morning," I said, forcing a smile as I stepped into the kitchen. Emily turned to me with her usual bright and cheerful expression, but something about it felt off. "Good morning," she replied, motioning to a stack of blueberry pancakes on the counter. "I made your favorite." "Pancakes." "My favorite." She was trying, and that only made it worse. "Thanks," I muttered, sitting down at the table. I picked up my fork, but as I ate, it all tasted like cardboard. My mind was racing, lost in a mess of doubts and suspicions. "So," Emily said, settling into the chair across from me, "everything's ready for tonight. James is coming over early to help with the decorations." At the mention of James, I felt my grip tighten on the fork. I didn't want to feel this way about him. He was my friend. But lately, the way they interacted had been getting to me. It was subtle, but I noticed things. The way they stood just a bit too close when they talked, the way she laughed a little harder at his jokes, and the way his eyes stayed on her for a moment too long. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it wasn't. "James, huh?" I said, my voice sounding sharper than I'd meant it to. Emily looked up, a hint of a frown on her face. "Is everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, just got a lot on my mind." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. She didn't push, and a part of me wished she had. Maybe if she asked the right questions I would have laid it all out, asked her about the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the distance between us that felt like a thick fog. But she didn't. Instead, she stood up, clearing the plates as if nothing had changed. But everything had. As the day went on, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About her. About James. I'd never been the jealous type, but recently I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening right in front of me, and I was too blind to see it. Every time her phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat. Every time she smiled at a text, a wave of nausea hit me. I decided to go for a walk, hoping the fresh air might clear my head and help me shake off the paranoia gnawing at me. The crisp autumn air filled my lungs as I wandered through the neighborhood, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to face. Was I losing it? Imagining things? Or was there something real behind my suspicions? When I got back, the house was buzzing with activity. Emily was setting up for the party, balloons and streamers covering the walls, the table piled with snacks and drinks. She moved around the room with a purpose, her smile bright as she adjusted the decorations. She looked happy, carefree. And of course, James was there too. He was helping her hang lights in the backyard, the two of them working together like they'd done this 100 times before. I stood in the doorway, watching them, feeling my chest tighten with every laugh, every smile they shared. I wanted to jump in, be part of the fun, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong in my own home. "Hey, birthday boy," James called out when he noticed me. He walked over, pulling me into a quick hug. "You ready for tonight?" I forced a grin, my stomach in knots. "Yeah, as ready as I'll ever be." As the evening wore on, guests started arriving, filling the house with laughter and chatter. I tried to enjoy myself. I really did. But every time I saw Emily and James standing close together, talking in low voices, the knot in my stomach tightened. I couldn't focus on anything else. The party, the laughter, the warmth of our friends, it all faded into the background, overshadowed by the growing sense of betrayal I couldn't shake. At one point I saw Emily slip out of the room, her phone in hand. My heart raced as I watched her go. After a few minutes I followed. She was in the hallway, her back to me, phone pressed to her ear again. She was whispering, just like she had been the night before. I stepped closer, my pulse pounding. Her voice was too soft to hear clearly, but I caught a few words. I know, just be careful tonight. A wave of nausea hit me, and I froze. I couldn't hear the rest, but I didn't need to. I knew. I turned and walked back to the party, my heart hammering in my chest, the world spinning around me. I needed to confront her. But not yet. Not here. I couldn't bring myself to ruin the party in front of everyone. So I put on a fake smile and acted like everything was fine, even though my life felt like it was falling apart right in front of me. By the time the clock hit 9, the party was in full swing. The house was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and lively conversation. Everyone seemed to be having a great time. Everyone but me. I couldn't stop watching Emily. Every little thing she did, every smile she gave, especially to James, sent a sharp pain through my chest. It felt like I was watching her through a pane of glass, distant and separate, while she carried on like nothing was wrong. James was always by her side, moving through the room with her, laughing, joking with our friends. And the way they stood so close to each other, it made me feel like I didn't belong in their little world. I kept trying to convince myself I was imagining things, that I was overreacting. But then I saw it. James's hand lingered on the small of her back for just a moment too long as they laughed together. It was subtle, something no one else would notice, but I saw it. My stomach turned, my throat tightening. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting me like a punch to the face. I needed a minute to calm down, to clear my head. I leaned against the porch railing, taking deep breaths, but it didn't help. The more I thought about it, the worse it got. The doubts, the suspicions, they were all crashing down on me, suffocating me. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring out at the dark street, trying to get a grip. But when I turned back toward the house, my blood ran cold. Through the kitchen window, I saw Emily and James. They were alone. Everyone else was in the living room, and there they were, hidden from view, standing too close, talking quietly. James was way too close. And then, he reached out to her. My heart felt like it was about to burst. His hand brushed her arm, and she didn't pull away. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she smiled, a soft, private smile just for him. The world tilted. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Everything I'd been pushing down for weeks hit me like a freight train. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't paranoia. This was betrayal. I stormed back inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't care if everyone saw. I didn't care if I ruined the party. I needed answers. Now. Emily. I shouted, my voice louder than I intended. The room went silent. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. All I could see was her face, wide-eyed and frozen as I marched toward her. Matt, what's wrong? She asked, her voice shaky. But I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew. She knew exactly what was wrong. What's going on? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. I pointed at James, who stood there, silent and pale. What's going on between you two? The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Emily's face turned red, her eyes darting around like she was looking for an escape. James took a step back, raising his hands defensively. Matt, man, it's not what you think, Emily said quickly, her voice desperate. Not what I think. I snapped, my voice rising. Then tell me what it is. Because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell looks like something's going on between you and James. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The silence was suffocating. I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on us, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. James finally spoke, his voice trembling. Matt, we're just friends. That's it. I glared at him, my fists clenched. Friends? Is that why you've been sneaking around with my wife? Is that why you've been whispering behind my back? Matt, please. Emily whispered, stepping toward me. It's not like that, I swear. I backed away, shaking my head. I couldn't believe this was happening. I couldn't believe the woman I loved, the one I trusted completely, had betrayed me like this. Tell me the truth, Emily, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I deserve that much. After everything we've been through, you owe me the truth. She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. But before she could say anything, her phone buzzed. The sound sliced through the tension like a knife. She glanced down, and that's when I saw it, the look of pure panic on her face as she reached for her phone, scrambling to silence it. I grabbed her wrist before she could answer. "Who is it?" I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. "Who the hell are you talking to?" Her eyes were wide with fear as she pulled her hand back. "Matt, please." But I'd had enough. Without thinking, I snatched the phone from her hand, my heart pounding in my ears as I glanced at the screen. And there it was, a message from him. "I'm waiting for you. Don't take too long." My blood ran cold. I looked up at Emily, her face now streaked with tears, pale as a ghost. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't answer, she didn't have to. I already knew. And in that instant, everything fell apart. The party was over. Most of the guests had awkwardly made their exits, leaving behind an unbearable silence. Emily stood in the middle of the living room, her face wet with tears, while I stood across from her, holding her phone like it was a bomb that had just gone off. The message on the screen confirmed everything I'd been dreading. I tossed the phone onto the couch, my chest tightening with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "Who is he, Emily?" I demanded, my voice cracking with emotion. "Tell me the truth." Her hand shook as she wiped her eyes, but she still couldn't bring herself to look at me. "Matt, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I snapped, my voice raw with pain. "I'm standing here with proof, Emily." "Who is he? How long has this been going on?" She let out a shaky breath, barely audible. It's been a few months." "A few months?" My mind reeled. For months she had been sneaking around, lying to me, pretending everything was fine while she was with someone else. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was closing in, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on my chest. I turned away from her, running my hands through my hair, trying to make sense of it all. "Why, Emily?" I asked, my voice cracking again. "Why would you do this?" She hesitated, then took a deep, shuddering breath. I felt alone, Matt. You were always working, always traveling. It felt like you weren't really here anymore. I needed someone to talk to, someone who made me feel seen. I spun around, anger boiling inside me. "So what? You found someone else? You just gave up on us? After everything we've been through, this is how you repay me?" Her face crumpled, and she sobbed into her hands. "I'm sorry, Matt. I never meant for it to happen. I didn't want to hurt you." "You didn't want to hurt me?" I could barely hold back my fury. "You've destroyed everything, Emily. Our life, our marriage, everything." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was her sobbing. I felt like I was drowning, caught in a whirlpool of anger and heartbreak with no way out. But then, something shifted in her expression. She wiped her tears away, and her face hardened, like she had made a decision. When she spoke again, her voice was low, almost cold. "Matt, I don't want this to get any worse than it already is." I frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" She met my gaze, her eyes no longer filled with pleading, but something sharper, calculated. "We can figure this out like adults. There's no need to drag this on or make it messier than it needs to be. If we're going to end this, let's do it clean." I stared at her, trying to understand. "What are you saying?" Emily took a step forward, her voice soft but firm. "I think it's best if we part ways. But I want what's fair." "Fair?" I repeated incredulously. "You've been cheating on me, and you're talking about fairness?" She sighed, a weary look crossing her face. "Matt, I've put just as much into this life as you have. The house, the savings, everything. It belongs to both of us. I'm not walking away with nothing." My blood froze as the reality sank in. She wasn't just ending our marriage, she was planning to take everything we built together. I stared at her, suddenly feeling like I didn't even know this woman. "You're kidding, right?" I whispered. She shook her head. No, I'm not. I've already spoken to a lawyer. And says I'm entitled to half of everything. The room spun, and I felt like I was going to be sick. You planned this, didn't you? This whole time, you've been planning to leave me and take everything. She didn't respond, but the look on her face told me everything I needed to know. I couldn't believe it. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. She was going to take me for everything I had. I took a step back, shaking my head. You're unbelievable. Matt, this doesn't have to get ugly, she said softly. We can work this out without tearing each other apart. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and empty. You've already torn us apart, Emily. There's nothing left. We stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity. The weight of everything that had been said, and everything that hadn't, hung heavy between us. I could feel the rage bubbling up inside me, threatening to boil over, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let her win. Not like this. You want out? I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Fine. But don't think for a second I'm going to just roll over and let you take everything from me. Her eyes flickered with a trace of doubt, clearly not expecting me to push back. Good. I'll talk to my lawyer, I said coldly as I headed for the door. But don't think for a second that this is over. I left her standing there, alone in what was once our home. A place that used to be filled with love and laughter had now become a battlefield. And the war was just getting started. The next few days were a blur of anger and confusion. Every time I replayed that conversation with Emily, it was like getting punched in the gut all over again. I couldn't believe that the woman I had loved and trusted for so many years had not only betrayed me emotionally but was also trying to destroy everything we had built together. I crashed at Mark's for a few nights. He's been my best friend for as long as I can remember, and thankfully, he didn't ask a lot of questions. He just gave me space, knowing I needed time to process everything. But even being away from the house, away from her, didn't lift the weight I was carrying. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, cold, calculating, ready to tear my life apart for her own gain. I knew I had to fight back. I couldn't just sit by and let her take everything from me. But every time I thought about the legal battle ahead, I felt sick to my stomach. Lawyers, courtrooms, dividing everything we had worked for, it felt so dirty. This wasn't how our story was supposed to end. But then again, I never thought our story would end at all. By the end of the week, I'd had enough. I couldn't keep hiding from it. I had to face her, figure out how we were going to move forward, if that was even possible. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked different, almost unrecognizable. Cold. Empty. I hesitated at the door, unsure of what to expect when I walked inside, but I knew I had to do it. I stepped in, and there she was, Emily, sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in hand, looking calm, like she was ready for this. When she saw me, she didn't seem surprised. If anything, she seemed prepared. We need to talk, I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. She set her phone down and looked at me, her face expressionless. I've already started talking to my lawyer. Her words hit me like a slap in the face, but I swallowed the pain and refused to let her see how much it hurt. I'm not going to let you take everything from me, Emily. You need to understand that. She sighed, standing up and crossing her arms. I'm not taking everything. I'm just taking what's mine. I stared at her, incredulous. What's yours? What's yours, Emily? We built this life together. I've worked my ass off for years to provide for us, and now you're telling me you deserve half? I do deserve half, she said coldly. I've given just as much to this life as you have. I'm not leaving empty-handed. Anger surged in my chest. You're leaving because you've been cheating on me for months. And now you want to take what I've worked for? She didn't flinch. Instead, she gave a small, bitter smile that chilled me to the bone. You were never here, Matt. You were always off working, always too busy. I was lonely. I needed more than you could give me. So it's my fault? I spat, unable to believe what I was hearing. You're the one who cheated, Emily. You destroyed our marriage, not me. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw just how cold and calculating she truly was. Maybe I did. But now I'm going to make sure I get what I deserve. I've talked to my lawyer, and I'm entitled to half of everything. You can fight me if you want, but it's not going to change anything. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I had never felt so much anger, so much betrayal in my entire life. But the worst part? She was right. Legally, she was entitled to half. And no matter how much I hated it, no matter how much it tore me apart, there was nothing I could do to stop her from taking what she wanted. I'll fight you, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I'll fight you for everything. She shrugged, her face calm and composed. Do what you need to do. I stared at her, completely unable to recognize the woman standing in front of me. The woman I had loved for years had turned into a stranger. I felt the last bit of hope drain out of me. This was it. This was the end of everything we had built together. And she didn't even care. Before I could say anything else, her phone buzzed again. I glanced down and saw the name flash on the screen. Him. Her lover. The one who had destroyed our marriage. The one she had chosen over me. That's him, isn't it? I asked, my voice barely audible. She looked at the phone, then back at me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt cross her face. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold indifference. It doesn't matter, she said quietly. None of this matters anymore. I couldn't take it. I turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I felt like I was suffocating, like the weight of everything was crushing me from the inside out. She had taken everything, my trust, my love, my future. Now she was going to take what was left of my life too. But as I drove away, something changed inside me. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to just sit back and let her take everything without putting up a fight. It didn't matter how ugly things got, lawyers, court battles, whatever it took, I was going to protect what was mine. She had already taken enough. Now, it was my turn to take something back. The days after that last showdown with Emily were some of the darkest of my life. The constant realization that she had been plotting not only to leave me but to strip me of everything gnawed at me, day and night. I didn't know how I was going to survive this, mentally, emotionally, or financially, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let her walk away victorious. I met with my lawyer, laying it all out. The lies, the betrayal, the sneaky way she had been planning to take half of what we had built together. I was prepared to fight, but even my lawyer admitted that without hard proof of her infidelity or deception, the court might side with her. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I was vulnerable. Then, out of the blue, I got a message that changed everything. It was from Mark, my best friend, who had been by my side through this entire mess. His text was short, just one line: "You need to see this." Attached were several photos and videos. My stomach churned as I opened the first one, my heart pounding. What filled the screen made my blood boil. There she was, Emily, with him. They were at different places, restaurants, bars, and even what looked like a hotel room. At first glance, some of the photos seemed innocent enough, but the videos? They told the real story. Emily and her lover, caught in the act, oblivious to everything around them. This was no longer a suspicion or just a bad feeling. This was undeniable proof. A flood of emotions hit me: rage, betrayal, and a strange sense of relief. Finally, I had what I needed. With this evidence, there was no way she could spin her lies any further. I sent everything straight to my lawyer. A few days later, we were sitting in the courtroom. Emily was on the other side, her lawyer next to her, looking as smug and confident as ever. She still thought she had the upper hand, that she would walk away with half of everything I had worked for. What she didn't know was what I had in my hand. As the proceedings began, her lawyer painted a picture of a woman neglected by her husband, forced to fend for herself both emotionally and financially. They argued that she deserved her fair share of our life together. Then it was my lawyer's turn. He stood up, calm and collected, and presented the photos and videos for the court to see. I watched as the color drained from Emily's face. She had no idea this was coming. The confidence she had worn like armor shattered in an instant. This evidence, my lawyer said, shows that Mrs. Harris has not only been unfaithful to her husband but that her infidelity has been ongoing for several months. This isn't about a marriage falling apart due to neglect. It's about calculated deception, where one party betrayed the other emotionally and sought to take half the assets under false pretenses. The courtroom fell into silence. I could see Emily's lawyer frantically whispering to her, but it was too late. The damage was done. The judge reviewed the evidence, his face unreadable. We sat there in silence, waiting for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the judge spoke. Based on the evidence, it's clear that Mrs. Harris's actions were not in good faith. Her infidelity, combined with her attempt to take a significant portion of the shared assets, demonstrates a lack of integrity in her claims. I rule in favor of Mr. Harris. The division of assets will be reconsidered, with the majority awarded to him. Relief washed over me, but it was a strange kind of relief, mixed with sadness. I had won, yes, but at what cost? My marriage was over. The woman I had loved was now a stranger. And while I was walking away with everything I had fought for, it didn't feel like a victory. Emily sat there shocked, her face pale, her hands trembling. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered all the lies, the betrayal, and how she had tried to take everything from me without a second thought. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. As I walked out of the courtroom, my lawyer shook my hand, congratulating me on the victory. But it didn't feel like a win. It felt like the end of a war I never wanted to be a part of. Mark was waiting for me outside. He gave me a nod, sympathy written all over his face. "You did it, man," he said softly. "You fought back," Mark said, his tone filled with pride. I nodded, feeling the weight of it all finally start to lift off my shoulders. "I couldn't have done it without you," I replied, thinking about the evidence he had sent me. Those photos, those moments caught on camera, had changed everything. He smiled, giving me a firm pat on the back. "Told you I had your back." We stepped outside, the crisp air hitting us, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the world seemed a little brighter. The battle was over, but as I stood there, taking in the sights and sounds of the city around me, I realized that winning wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Now I had to figure out how to rebuild my life from the ground up. There was a long road ahead, but one thing was certain: Emily had already taken enough from me. She wasn't going to take anything more. Dear listeners, thank you for all your incredible support and for tuning into my stories on YouTube. Your feedback and enthusiasm mean the world to me. Stay tuned for more exciting tales. Warm regards.